for the discussions and debates K2 brings to our community. Thanks for watching.
Let's introduce the candidates to you tonight. First, the incumbent Congresswoman, Democrat Marie Glusenkamp Perez, a small business owner in Southwest Washington, and Republican Joe Kent, a 20-year combat veteran, Army Ranger, and former CIA field operative. The rules for the debate tonight will be as follows. There will be no opening statements. The candidates will each have a minute to answer each question. Each candidate will also have 3 30-second rebuttals. They can choose to use them throughout the debate. Each candidate will have a minute at the end for closing remarks. We flipped a coin to determine who will answer the first question. Marie won that coin toss. Marie, recent Gallup polling shows more than 4 in 10 Americans list the economy as the #1 issue ahead of this election. What do you see as the biggest economic issue facing our country right now, and what will you do to address it?
Yeah, you know, when I'm talking to neighbors and friends at daycare drop-off or at the gas station, the economy is the thing that I hear the most about. And so I'm proud of my work voting for the Fiscal Responsibility Act. I'm proud of my work to introduce a bipartisan and constitutional amendment to balance the budget. And I'm proud of my work to level the playing field for small businesses. You know, when I talk to farmers, they tell me that they used to be able to sell their chickens everywhere. Now there's 2 people they can sell it to, and those corporations control the price of propane and fertilizer. That's not right. We've got to compete against those monopolistic forces. We've got to ensure that there's a level playing field because it is families that end up footing the bill for that kind of policy. You know, we've seen the way that Joe has supported shutting down the government if he doesn't get every single thing that he wants on his wish list. The reality is that's political arson, and it's going to be small business owners who foot the bill first if the economy tanks. I'm proud of my record doing exactly what I said I would do, supporting small businesses like mine in the trades.
Marie, thank you. Joe, the same question to you. What do you see as the biggest economic issue facing our country right now, and what will you do to address it?
So the biggest issue right now that we're facing is this out-of-control inflation. Washington, D.C. being addicted to printing money in a way that none of our families can, none of our small businesses can. That's what's driving inflation. And unfortunately, my opponent has voted for $4 trillion in new inflationary spending. This out-of-control spending is driving up the price at the pump. It's driving up the price at the grocery store. When I get out and I talk to my friends and my neighbors, I even think of my own small community. Up in Yacolt, we have a small food pantry in our church, and people right now are having to pool their resources, canned goods, bringing in the eggs that their chickens lay, just some of the fresh fruits and vegetables from their garden, to get people really everything that they need, when just a few years ago, they were able to make ends meet on their salary. This inflation is being driven from Washington, D.C., and unfortunately, Biden, Harris, and Marie Perez have continued to spend trillions over what we take in tax revenue. We have to actually balance the budget in Washington, D.C., live within our means like every American family, put an actual cap on spending. That's what I'll do in Washington, D.C.
Joe, you go first this time. Many Americans are dealing with affordability issues in their daily lives. For example, grocery prices are up 30% in 4 years by some estimates. What will you do as a member of Congress to address affordability for everyday items?
The most important thing that we can do in Congress is actually live within our means. Do the individual appropriations bills. It's very simple. Washington, D.C., through federal tax revenue, takes in around $5 trillion. That's what we have to spend. We can't spend $2 to $2.5 trillion over what we're doing, and that's exactly what we're doing right now. My opponent, like I said, has voted for $4 trillion in new spending. The Biden-Harris plan has us spending $7 trillion to $7.5 trillion. And what do we get for it? We're not getting any lower prices at the grocery store or at the gas pump. We have to balance the budget. We have to get back to being energy independent. The war on U.S. energy by the Biden-Harris administration, fully supported by every single Democrat in Congress, like my opponent, that's got to stop. We've got to actually drill our own gas, lower the price at the pump, do the individual appropriations bills in Congress, stop the out-of-control money printing, put a real cap on spending. One of the biggest problems we had in this last Congress is that my opponent voted to put no cap on spending to give the executive branch an unlimited credit card to continue to drive inflation.
Marie, the same question to you. What will you do in Congress to address affordability for everyday items?
Yeah, the crisis is real for families. People are putting their grocery bills on their credit cards. That's not the America that I believe in and that I want to leave to my child. You know, right now in this country, we are importing 40% of the fresh fruits and vegetables we consume. That's a problem. I'm proud of my work on the Agriculture Committee to support our local producers and have a level playing field for all kinds of growers. It's one of the reasons that I'm the only candidate here endorsed by the Washington State Farm Bureau, because I listen to our producers and our farmers and I fight for us at the table. I'm proud of my work on right to repair to ensure that the cost of fixing your own tractor isn't hurting our farmers. Farmers have a suicide rate 3.5 times higher than any other population. And part of it is because of their debt leverage. So we've got to be supporting our agricultural producers. We've got to be supporting a level playing field and a fair market practice.
Marie, in January 2020, data from the U.S. Energy Information Administration shows gas prices averaged $2.63 a gallon. In August, it was $3.50 a gallon, August of this year, that is. What role does Congress play in addressing the cost of gas, which some experts say leads to cost increases across the economy?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I am one of the top 3 most bipartisan voting members of the U.S. House of Representatives. I'm proud of representing our independent values, our belief in having energy independence, and the kinds of pragmatic policies that lower the energy costs for working families. There was just an OMB study that demonstrated that a lot of Biden's electric vehicle tax credits went to the highest earning households in this country. Those electric vehicles are not making their way into the secondary market because a lot of them aren't repairable. We've got to have people who are turning wrenches and driving trucks and changing diapers at the table when we're talking about the pragmatic environmentalism and energy policies that build wealth in the middle class. I'm not here, to support a wealthy family buying a 3rd vehicle. I'm here to support bringing down the energy costs of working families through tax credits and things like putting a skirt on your mobile home.
Joe, the same question for you. What role does Congress play in addressing the cost of gas?
Congress needs to unleash U.S. energy. The restrictions that the Biden-Harris administration have put on exploratory drilling and actually tapping into our natural resources have put us at the mercy of OPEC and other foreign exporters. We also have a major problem with my opponent and the entire Democrat caucus supporting Biden and Harris's war on domestic energy. Regardless of what she says about bipartisan votes, she has voted in lockstep with the Democrat Party that is at war with U.S. domestic energy. You can just take a look at the price at the pump just a couple years ago, compare it to now, and that's all the information that you need. We need to actually get back to being energy independent, and when it comes time to actually put American jobs first, she can talk all day long about supporting American manufacturing, but she voted to allow Joe Biden to ship high-paying tech jobs overseas to China. So we actually have to use what resources we have here in the United States with American labor, get back to being energy independent, and that's going to drive down the price of the pump and the price of all goods.
Marie, would you like to use a rebuttal? Joe, this question's for you. The U.S. is currently pumping over 13 million barrels of oil per day, the most of all time. The U.S. became a net exporter of energy in 2019. The U.S. became a net exporter of petroleum in 2020. Federal data also shows the U.S. produced more petroleum than it consumed in 2022. We do still import crude oil and other energy sources. What exactly do you mean when you say energy independent?
Right, so we need to get back to doing exploratory drilling, fully using the potential of the oil fields in ANWR, in West Virginia, Pennsylvania, and down in Texas. What we've done right now under the Biden-Harris administration is we stopped issuing exploratory permits to smaller oil field owners, and that really just benefited the major corporations. So we've got to open up the market, and that's going to actually flood the market with cheaper and more affordable oil. We can also do a lot in terms of producing our own crude. We can't rely on these foreign sources of oil and crude. We've actually got to just really unleash U.S. energy. I support an all the above energy solution. So if there's a potential for green energy, I'm fine with it as long as it doesn't ship American jobs overseas or put us at a disadvantage from a foreign country. But we have all the oil and natural gas that we need right here in America. We've got to open up our pipelines and get back to doing exploratory drilling.
Marie, Republicans blame the Biden administration and Democrats in Congress for the cost of energy, specifically related to oil production. What is your response to that criticism?
Yeah, you know, I was one of maybe 5 Democrats that voted in favor of H.R. 2. That was the energy bill, because I've seen the way that working families are hit first when our energy policies don't match reality, you can't push with a rope. And that's why I've been working for the long view of an economy that works for the middle class, where there's a level playing field, fair competition, a real focus on ensuring that energy costs are low for working families, but that we are producing an all of the above policy with the lowest emissions. Our petroleum has a lower emissions rate than a lot of the other countries. And so we've got to think about policies that lower global emissions and don't advance foreign dictators who benefit from their oil wealth.
Are you good? Would you like to use a rebuttal?
Yeah, I'd love to.
You have 30 seconds, Joe.
Yeah, so she says that she made this bipartisan vote for U.S. energy, but she voted against it, and then she voted for it, and then she voted against it again when it was part of an overall budget package that would put it into operation. Go to mariewatch.com. You'll see what her voting record is. There's links there to her House.gov actual voting record. If she takes this seat, if she holds this seat and the Democrats get control of the House, we will continue to have U.S. energy independence suppressed, and the price at the pump will continue to stay high, and so will the inflation.
Maria, this question is for you. The federal data shows unemployment is slightly higher in both the Portland and Longview metro areas. The Portland metro area includes Vancouver. What will you do to address employment specifically in the 3rd Congressional District?
Yeah, so I live in rural Skamania County on a gravel road. I get my internet from a radio tower, and in Skamania County, about 80% of employed people are employed outside of the county because we have basically gutted our natural resource economies. And that has downstream effects on the pulp mills and paper mills in Longview and all across our county. You know, it's great to have golf courses and gift shops, but you don't get there without having a strong tie to your natural resource economies. And, you know, I don't want to turn the woods into a terrarium. I want to build my house out of lumber harvested from the Gifford Pinchot and not have to import it from somewhere else. That's the kind of pragmatic environmentalism that I advance as a 6th-generation Washingtonian whose family has a proud history. You know, it's important that people have a sense that if they work hard, they can get ahead and own a home, that they have the same opportunities to raise a family that my parents had. And a lot of people in my generation just don't have that hope. They're working 3 jobs and they're still not making ends meet. And so it's critical that when we're thinking about building the economy, we're supporting small business owners, family businesses like mine.
Joe, the same question for you. What will you do to address employment specifically in the 3rd Congressional District?
Yeah, I think one of the most important things that we can do is make sure that we're not shipping high-paying technology jobs overseas to China like my opponent voted to do. You know, I was out talking to United Precision. It's a great family-owned technology business in Washougal. They employ a lot of local tradesmen. They employ a lot of folks in tech. And look, they're really being hurt by this policy of shipping jobs overseas. We've got to bring back tariffs that actually ensure that we're protecting American labor and American jobs. Look, I know we're going to get to the southern border later on, but all of these illegal immigrants that are coming into our country, they are depressing the wages of the working class. They're competing Americans out of jobs because they'll work for a lot less than American citizens are. We've got to protect American manufacturing, making sure that businesses are making things here in America. We use tariffs to do that. We use tax breaks to ensure they're incentivized to work here. And we've got to get the immigration under control to ensure that jobs aren't being stolen from hardworking Americans.
We also have some viewer questions tonight for the candidates. This one right here relates to housing and affordability.
I actually work with a company, and we work with, we do housing and employment services, and then we get many people coming in that are being evicted from their homes, and there's a huge lack of funding to where we're able to help these people. We help them the best we can, but I think the biggest issue is affordable housing, and where are those houses?
To that point, federal data released in September shows the cost of housing contributed to a big part of the year-over-year inflation from August 2023 to August 2024. Joe, this is for you. What will you do in Congress to address housing affordability?
So people are being evicted because they can't make rent, they can't make their mortgage. That's a direct reflection of the inflation. These people were probably in a good position just a couple years ago. I was out knocking on doors the other day in Vancouver, and I had several people tell me that, hey, if the economy continues in this direction, if they don't get a pay raise to keep up with the inflation, that they're going to have to downsize and have to move out of their home. So inflation is the #1 driver of this issue. But also, look, with the wide open southern border, we have inserted 10, 12 million people into this country that are now also competing for housing. It's basic economics. You have more people competing for fewer resources. That's going to drive the cost up. So the border is directly tied into this. Inflation, stopping the out of control money printing, that's absolutely essential. And then look, we've got to stop major hedge funds from competing and buying up homes. It's ridiculous that BlackRock and these other hedge funds can come in and undercut first-time home buyers.
Marie, the same question for you. What will you do in Congress to address housing affordability?
Yeah. So Dean and I actually built our house ourselves in rural Skamania County because banks don't like to loan to self-employed people in the trades. That was the only way that we were going to become homeowners. I mean, thank God, Dean had an excellent drafting teacher in high school. We drew the plans ourselves with a pencil. I know that can seem like a faraway reach, but we are a nation of builders and makers and people who are proud of being able to build our own things. And so we've got to have a clear regulatory environment. One of the policies I've championed in Congress is a bill that would prioritize federal housing dollars for communities and cities that simplify their zoning and permitting. That's a huge piece of the costs. The other thing is that, you can't push with a rope. We've just got to build more housing. We've got to support homeownership rates, and we've got to support shop class in junior high so we have those skills in our own communities.
Going back to our viewer questions now, one voter has a question related to a similar topic we hear about often.
Just what are you doing about homelessness? It's right outside of my front door. People falling asleep, because they're high on drugs. It's dangerous. I have a 1-year-old kid. What are we doing about it?
So we will get to drug use in just a second, but first, Marie, this question's for you. What will you do as a member of Congress to cut down on the number of unsheltered homeless people in Southwest Washington?
We have got to build more housing. We have got to make it easier to get treatment for drug addiction than it is to get high. The average federally involved affordable housing unit in our state costs something like $500,000. We built our house for $120K. It's a nice house. And we've got to build more housing, support people with the skills to do that, support the regulatory environment where people are able to do that, because homelessness is so responsive to housing costs. We all see it. It's not the America we want to live in. I actually had an employee have a homeless man come at them with a pipe. It's real, it's scary. I'm not going to gaslight anyone and say that it's not those things. It is, and I'm with you in fighting for that. And my work on the Small Business Committee, my work in our legislative policy is to ensure that our views and interests are represented and that we're supporting people in building more starter homes.
Joe, the same question for you. What will you do as a member of Congress to cut down on the number of unsheltered homeless people in Southwest Washington?
I spent a little over 20 years in the military defending our country. Went to combat 11 times for our nation. And one of the things that hurts me most as someone who's sacrificed and bled for this country and buried too many of my friends and even my late wife is that we bled so much and fought so hard overseas to come home and see Americans living in destitute squalor. We've got to stop prioritizing every other country, and we have to start prioritizing our own citizens. We need to get mental health treatment for the folks that are in mental health crisis, reopen some of the federal mental health institutions, get these people away from residential areas, get these people away from schools. We need to get these people drug treatment. Right now, a lot of the shelters are tolerating rampant drug use, and it's just creating this problem where it's a revolving door of addiction and homelessness. We need to get these people clean and sober, get them the mental health that they actually need. And look, I know we're going to get to the border, but these lethal drugs like the fentanyl that's coming across the border that recently killed a toddler in Vancouver, that's what that young man was worried about. He's worried about his daughter getting her hands on something like fentanyl and dying. We've got to actually secure the border and put our citizens first.
Joe, this question is for you first. CDC data shows overdose deaths went up in both Oregon and Washington, despite declining nationwide over a recent 12-month period. Fentanyl is responsible for the vast majority of those deaths, once again, according to the CDC. What will you do to reverse this trend in the 3rd District?
Fentanyl is killing people in our community. We've had countless folks that we know and we love die in our communities from fentanyl. The fentanyl is coming from the wide open southern border. One of the first votes my opponent took in Congress was to leave the border wide open. And now we are suffering the consequences. One of my first actions in Congress, my top priority, is to secure that border. I understand perfectly how to secure it. We build the wall, we get more law enforcement down there, we get the military down there if we need to, but we stop the flow of fentanyl from coming into our country. And then from there, we need our federal law enforcement agencies to actually support our sheriff's departments and our police departments and take care of this fentanyl, aggressively target the cartels and those trafficking the fentanyl in this district. Look, I've talked to the task force that handles fentanyl between Portland and Seattle, and they say it's all coming from across the southern border. The first step before you do anything else is closing down the southern border, and she failed to do that.
Marie, the same question for you. What will you do to reverse this trend of deadly overdoses in the 3rd District?
Yeah, there is not anybody watching who hasn't been impacted by fentanyl. Whether you know it or not, it is hollowing out our rural communities. And I think that a lot of us feel like if this was a problem that was hitting wealthier people first, there would have been action on this a long time ago. We cannot wait for this action. We have got to secure the southern borders. It's one of the reasons that I helped pass a bill called the End Fentanyl Bill that would give Border Patrol more agency, more resources to stop them before they get here. These drugs are hollowing out our communities, and we can't wait. My action and insistence and urgency on this, my seriousness in taking on the Biden administration's failed border security policies, is one of the reasons that I'm the only candidate here who has the endorsement of Washington State's oldest rank-and-file police union. Joe doesn't have that.
Marie, this question is for you. Your opponent has criticized past comments you made, saying, quote, "No one stays up at night thinking about the border." What is your response to that criticism?
Yeah, I'm not a skilled politician, right? I ran an auto repair shop. I ran for Congress because I didn't see our values represented in Washington, D.C. That quote was taken incredibly out of context. What I was saying was that it's not racist to want to secure the southern border. What I said was that people stay awake at night worrying that their kid can't get a spot in rehab, that their truck's going to get repossessed, that they're going to lose their business. When we think about how to address these problems, we've got to think of the full spectrum of symptoms, address those, and also address the root causes driving those incredibly painful symptoms. It's not acceptable to let working families, people in my rural community, foot the bill for a wide open border policy.
Joe, an immigration question for you. A lot of data suggests undocumented migrants pay billions of dollars in federal, state, and local taxes. Should these individuals be offered a pathway to citizenship?
No. If you came into our country illegally, you need to leave. Your first act as someone who wants to be an American cannot be to violate our laws. Now, look, I understand there's people who come here when they are still children. That's a completely different story. We can offer them a pathway to citizenship if they can prove they came here as children. But if your first act was to break the law and come into our country, you simply cannot stay here. And look, these illegal immigrants are costing us billions of dollars. They're accessing the services that we pay into with our tax money, and they're hardly paying into any of that. They're driving down the cost of labor. They're hurting the competing power of American workers from actually negotiating a fair salary. And then they're also draining the public resources. Most of these folks don't have health insurance, so when they have a problem, they go to the ER and we pick up the bill. The housing crisis that we've talked about so much. Look, there's a lot of competition right now in the housing market because we've flooded the country with millions of illegals. If we don't have a country that has borders and has an immigration policy that supports the American people, then we simply no longer have a nation.
Thank you. We do have to take a quick break. We'll be right back with more on immigration and so many other topics. Stay with us. Welcome back to this special edition of K2 News. Before we get back to the debate, we'd like to thank our sponsor, Willamette University. Tonight, K2 is on your side, hosting a debate between the candidates for Washington's 3rd Congressional District. Let's get back to our questions. This one is for Joe Kent first. Federal data shows millions.
Can I respond to his last immigration?
Yes, you have
Yes.
a 30-second rebuttal.
Yeah, so it's just not true what Joe's saying. I take border security very seriously, and I took on the Biden administration over their failed immigration policies. I worked to reinstate Remain in Mexico policies, raising the threshold for asylum, Title 42. Joe and his buddies, they supported killing the most conservative bipartisan immigration bill we'd seen in a generation. Joe goes down and makes a vacation out of live streaming himself at the southern border for internet points. I have been working to secure the border. Joe called for a 20-year ban on all immigration to reestablish a white majority. He wants a white majority. I want a secure border.
Thank you so much.
So can I respond to that?
You can use 30 seconds, Joe.
Yeah, so she voted to leave the border wide open, one of the first votes that she took. The bill that she's talking about, it did not restore Remain in Mexico because it didn't fix the asylum loophole. If she had actually been down to the border herself, she'd see that most of the folks coming into our country are seeking out the Border Patrol officers who actually claim asylum. The so-called bipartisan border bill that she's talking about codified this current invasion into law, allowing millions of illegals to come into our country. Same thing with the continuation of the fentanyl. The nonsense that she's saying about white majorities and all this is because she doesn't want to talk about her actual voting record. Fought for our country for well over 20 years. I know exactly what it means to fight and how to secure things, and I'll go down and secure the border.
Joe, back to our questions. This is for you. You'll have 1 minute to answer. Federal data shows millions of border crossings at the southern border in just the last 2 years. The data also shows millions of people have been deported, expelled, or otherwise removed. However, that number is far lower than the estimated number of border crossings and encounters. What specific actions do you support to address immigration, specifically along the southern border?
So first and foremost, we have to build a wall to stop the flow of fentanyl. If you'd go down to the border, like my opponent refuses to do, you would see that the Border Patrol officers are overwhelmed because the folks coming across are overwhelming the Border Patrol officers specifically to claim asylum. Then the fentanyl comes through. So we've actually got to physically secure the border to make sure the fentanyl stops killing our loved ones and our neighbors. We've got to close the asylum loophole. You need to go to a third country or remain in Mexico to actually claim asylum. We've got to cut off all kinds of benefits. Any kind of benefit that illegals can get, they need to be cut off from. We need to reinstate mandatory E-Verify to go after the employers that are serving as a draw and undercutting American wages. We've also got to actually start deporting the people who came into our country illegally. I think when we cut off the incentives, the financial incentives for most of them to come here, a lot of them will simply self-deport. But look, it's October 7th. There's a horrific attack in Israel. We saw firsthand what happens when you can't secure your border. We've had 10 to 12 million illegals come into our country. Many of them could seek to do us harm. We've got to locate the folks that won't leave and actually physically deport them to secure our country.
Marie, the same question for you. What specific actions do you support to address immigration, specifically along the southern border?
Yeah, well, I'm really proud to have voted for the largest Border Patrol workforce in our nation's history. I take this seriously. And I'm proud of the work that I've done voting for the End the Border Catastrophe bill. I'm proud of my work supporting the real reform that supports small businesses, domestic agriculture, homeownership, the policies that are helping people who are, just like my family, working in the middle class. You know, Joe is on tape. He's on tape saying that he supports a 20-year ban on immigration to reestablish a white majority. That's not my characterization of what he said. That's what he said in a town hall. He'll change his tune when the pollsters tell him to, but we know what's motivating him.
Joe, do you care to respond?
Have I already used two?
You've used two. You have one more rebuttal.
I'll save it.
Okay. Let's get back to our viewer questions. This one is coming from Univision, Portland's Spanish-speaking station. That team is located in K2's newsroom.
Hello, I'm Guillermo Mota with Univision Portland. Given the rise of migrant asylum seekers in the area in the past year alone, what is your strategy to help these families out while still pushing for immigration reform?
Marie, that question is for you first.
Yeah, you know, when we talk about the immigration policy, we've got to talk about the humanitarian crisis at the border. And, you know, the reality is, like, the fentanyl that's coming over, the cartels who are extorting business owners and trafficking in human lives, that's got to be stopped. That's why we've got to fund our Border Patrol agents. And, you know, we've also got to ensure that our asylum policies are being used by the people who should be using them and not being exploited by people with lawyers. We've got to ensure that our immigration policy is predictable and fair, but we also can't let a perfect immigration bill and immigration policy hold hostage substantive action to secure our southern border now.
Joe, the same question for you. What is your strategy to help families lawfully seeking asylum while still pushing for immigration reform?
So first off, that nonsensical claim she made about the racist white majority, you can go to KGW. They actually fact-checked one of her ads and completely debunked that nonsense. In terms of asylum, look, asylum is near and dear to me. I actually sponsored some of our Iraqi allies who came over after serving with us overseas, but we actually have to vet these people claiming asylum in the first safe third country or in Mexico. The current asylum process is completely and totally being exploited, and it's broken. We've got to secure the border. We've got to close this asylum loophole. All the border bills that she has proposed have failed to do this. They've only paid lip service to this. H.R. 2, the bill that she voted against, would have closed the asylum loophole and made people seeking asylum do it in the first safe third country or back in Mexico so we can properly vet these people. We have to have an immigration policy that supports the American people. That is our first duty and responsibility, is to make sure American citizens are taken care of and to make sure that our country is sovereign and secure. Marie Perez, Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, they've all proven time and time again that they simply will not do it. If they were going to do it, they would have done it 2 years ago, they would have done it 4 years ago, but here we are in 2024 still talking about it.
Joe, thank you for that. Marie, would you care to respond? Or are we good to move on? Okay. Joe, your opponent is highlighting past comments from you expressing support for a nationwide abortion ban. You now say you don't support that. Why should voters take your word today?
So I support the Supreme Court's decision, and that decision about abortion, it's back at the state level. So from the federal level, I will not support a federal abortion ban. All those decisions are back at the state. What I do support is lowering the cost associated with raising kids, making childbirth much, much cheaper, bringing down the cost and making child tax deductions, also making items like baby formula and diapers, making those tax-free. Look, I took an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States of America. I believe in our system. When the Supreme Court makes its ruling, it makes its ruling, and I fully support that. I've proven that with my service in the military. I understand that abortion is a incredibly divisive issue, and maybe people disagree on it, but we've come with a great compromise, and that issue is now back at the state level. In Washington State, abortion simply isn't on the ballot. If you make that choice on your own, you're free to do so in Washington State, and I would not support a federal abortion ban.
Marie, a question for you on abortion. More than a dozen states have no restrictions on abortion. Do you support any length of time after which to prohibit abortion?
Yeah, so when I decided to run for office, I had an 8-month-old son, so this was top of mind for me. And what I've seen since being in D.C. is that these laws are being written by staffer bros in bow ties. They do not know what preeclampsia is. They do not know what placenta previa is. And they have no business telling us when and how we can access medical care. Joe Kent signed a pledge to support a national ban on abortion. He's on tape calling for a constitutional amendment to ban abortion in all cases. You know, he is saying exactly what the pollsters tell him to, but we know what he believes. He says his word is his bond, but his word just goes with the wind, and we can't trust him. Our rights in Washington State are not safe with people like Joe Kent voting in D.C. We've got to ensure that our rights are protected here and that families are able to make decisions that are right for them.
Joe, this question is for you. On September 4th, police say 14-year-old Colt Gray walked into his high school in Georgia and killed 2 teachers and 2 students with a rifle bought for him by his father. It's yet another in a long list of mass shootings at American schools. What do you think should be done so that America does not continue to be the only developed country with such a high number of mass shootings?
It's an absolute tragedy when a parent loses a child, especially with something that's completely preventable like that. You know, I'm very sorry for that family, all the families affected, and they're in my prayers. What we need to do is we need to actually protect what we love. We need to actually allocate more school resource officers, more police officers, and even private security, well-trained, armed private security, to secure our children at school. It's been proven time and time again that these shooters, they look for soft targets. That was the case with the tragic shooting down in Nashville. That shooter cased out a couple of different schools that had armed security and then moved on to the one that didn't have it. We have enough money if we actually prioritize American citizens to secure our children. We've just got to stop prioritizing foreign aid and foreign wars. My opponent has voted to send $86 billion overseas to secure other borders while leaving our border wide open and while leaving our schools wide open. Let's finally prioritize what we care about. Let's care about our own borders. Let's care about our own children and protect that, allocate resources to that. That's what I'll do in D.C.
Marie, the same question for you. What do you think should be done so that America does not continue to be the only developed country with such a high number of mass shootings?
Yeah, these shootings are an absolute tragedy. And, you know, we have got to do more to support these kids that are suffering from social isolation, poor family support, a lack of meaningful connections in their community. The reality is, when you open the hood on a lot of those data points, the vast majority of the deaths that are occurring from firearm violence is suicides, especially for our young people. And so we've got to start taking those facts seriously if we want to address what's driving those numbers. We've got to ensure that we have strong communities. You know, we've got to ensure that at some point during the day, every kid has a chance to be the smartest person in their school. That means fighting for honors level shop class in junior high. You know, I support the Second Amendment. Where I live, it's going to take the sheriff half an hour to show up. And so the same policies won't work everywhere. We have got to support our Second Amendment, just like we support our other freedoms, like the right to choose when and where we receive health care.
Thank you. Marie, this question is for you first. Today marks the 1-year anniversary of the Hamas terror attack on Israel. The war continues today between Hamas and Israel with no apparent end in sight. What role does the United States play in ending that conflict?
Yeah, October 7th was the deadliest day for the Jewish people since the Holocaust. And the fastest way for the war to come to an end is for Hamas to release the hostages they are still holding. You know, I know in a rural community running a small business, the only thing you've got at the end of the day is your reputation for keeping your word. Every vote I take is with our community in mind. But our national security is advanced when there is a liberal democracy in the Middle East. Our national security is advanced when foreign dictators can't invade democratic allies. And, you know, I agree with Speaker Mike Johnson when he says that we would rather send bullets now than Americans later. My opponent has called Putin a reasonable guy. He's called Zelensky a thug. He's trying to make us split the baby and say that we will not be safer if we abandon our allies.
Joe, the same question for you. What role does the United States play in ending the conflict between Israel and Hamas?
So the reason why the October 7th attacks happened is because the Biden-Harris administration gave Iran access to billions of dollars. And then Hamas, the Houthis, Hezbollah all had the resources they needed to disrupt the Abraham Accords, which brought a historic peace in the Middle East. One of the biggest mistakes, I think, unfortunately, that Israel made was waiting for America and asking them for permission. The Biden-Harris administration has attempted to fund both sides of this. Right after the October 7th attacks took place, Speaker Mike Johnson, House Republicans, put forward a bill that would have clawed back money from the IRS and not put any more new inflationary spending on the backs of the American people and given immediate assistance to the Israelis. Unfortunately, my opponent and every other Democrat waited. They refused to sign on to that bill and waited for several more months so they could negotiate a much bigger foreign aid package of new inflationary spending that benefited their defense contractor donors because they wanted to send $86 billion of new inflationary spending overseas in the dead of the night. We need to let Israel defend itself, take care of and finish Hamas, support them diplomatically by reinforcing the Abraham Accords and cutting off every access to cash that Iran has.
Marie, you have 2 rebuttals remaining. Would you like to use one?
Yeah, you know, what Joe's talking about, I actually am really proud of my work. I led a bipartisan movement to ensure that we were supporting our Democratic allies abroad and defending our borders at home. It was called the Defending Borders, Defending Democracy Bill. And that's what ended up being broken into 5 votes and passed on the floor. So I'm proud of my bipartisan work to secure our borders and ensure that our Democratic allies have the resources they need to stop these fascists from invading them or terrorists.
Joe, this question is for you first. Ukraine and Russia are also at war. The United States and other governments in Europe have sent billions of dollars in military aid to Ukraine. Would you support more U.S. aid going to Ukraine?
Look, we're talking right now about billions and billions of dollars going to foreign countries while Americans are struggling to fill a tank of gas and can't afford groceries, and while we can't even secure our own southern border. The current status in Ukraine, it's an absolute disaster and a tragedy. A generation of young Ukrainians has gotten killed because we pursued this policy that she and too many in Washington, D.C. advocate, that's sending unlimited billions of dollars that we can't afford over to Ukraine, unlimited amounts of military hardware. And look, for the last 2 years, that's been the strategy, and that has not changed the outcome of the war. As a matter of fact, a generation of Ukrainians are dead. Russia now controls more actual terrain inside of Ukraine than they did at the beginning of the war. American missiles are now being shot into Russia, and we're closer to World War III than we've ever been. Our #1 goal needs to be put Americans first, stop sending our money overseas, take care of our people, secure our border, get this conflict in Ukraine and Russia to an end as fast as we can, take down the nuclear tensions, and stop the killing.
Marie, do you support continued aid going to Ukraine in its war against Russia?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Russia invaded a democratically elected nation, and our Ukrainian community here at home is suffering personally because of that. You know, if we walk away from our reputation as an ally that stands by our partners, China is waiting in the wings to seize that power. The talking points Joe is using are exactly what our foreign adversaries use. Actually, Russian propagandists are quoting him in their own newspapers. He's become a puppet for other interests, not our interests. We will not become more secure domestically by walking away from our allies. We've got to ensure Ukraine has the tools they need to end this war on their terms.
Let's get back to the district. Are we good to move on? On the I-5 replacement bridge, an important topic for people living in Southwest Washington and the Portland area. Marie, this question is for you first. Do you support the current replacement plan for the interstate bridge? If so, why? If not, what would you like to see?
Yeah, you know, I believe in being a nation where we still believe in taking on the big projects, where we're still proud of being a people who are the best tradesmen in the world. That bridge carries $132 million of goods every day. Not replacing it is not an option for our small business community and our farmers who rely on that bridge. I'm really proud to have brought back over $2 billion of our federal tax dollars to replace that bridge. I didn't do it by sending an email. I did it by bringing the Secretary of Transportation out, having him stand on the bridge in the rain, feel it shake when the trucks go past, and tell him it's 107 years old. Do you feel safe here? You don't. We've got to replace this bridge with Southwest Washington labor, American-made steel. And, you know, Joe's been talking about building a third bridge that drops out somewhere in Battleground, I guess appropriating other people's farmland. He is literally trying to sell us a bridge on this one. That's not reality.
Joe, on the interstate replacement bridge, do you support the current plan? If so, why? If not, what would you like to see?
No, the current plan basically replaces a 3-lane bridge with a 3-lane bridge for several $1 million. And also what she's not telling you is we're going to get light rail and tolls put on that bridge. So light rail that dumps downtown Portland's problems into downtown Vancouver, and tolls that disproportionately target Washingtonians. So look, what I support is having the federal government actually do its job. A bridge between two states is a clear-cut federal nexus. We need a third bridge that alleviates congestion. Replacing a 3-lane bridge with a 3-lane bridge, whether it's a replacement or just an upgrade, it does nothing to actually relieve congestion. Portland and Vancouver have grown significantly. We need a way for through traffic on I-5 to get around Portland and to get around Vancouver, and we need a dedicated third bridge for that. I support retrofitting and improving and making sure the current bridge is actually safe, but what I don't support is circumventing the will of the voters in Clark County and having the federal government stick light rail and tolls on that bridge. That's exactly what my opponent supports.
We have time for one more bonus question. Each candidate will have 45 seconds to answer this question. I want to circle back to asylum. Members of both parties acknowledge the current system, the current number of people lawfully seeking asylum exceeds the capacity the U.S. government can handle in a timely manner. Joe, this will go for you first. What changes, if any, would you make to the asylum system?
So the current asylum system is broken. If you can get a foot inside of the United States of America, or if you can make a reservation on the CBP1 app, you basically are granted asylum. We have to stop allowing people to come into our country. And look, anybody who's been brought into our country under the Biden-Harris administration who hasn't gone through proper vetting, they need to be removed from our country. The asylum system is being exploited. It's completely broken. It's the same thing with parole in place, temporary protective status, all these different statuses we've given to bring unvetted people into our nation. So we actually have to have a physical border wall to stop the fentanyl from coming into our country, to stop people from coming into our country illegally. And then there has to be a process where we vet those seeking asylum in the first safe third country or in Mexico. All the proposals that she has put forward fail to do this.
Joe.
They say the words were made in Mexico, but they don't actually close the asylum loophole.
Marie, the same question for you. What changes, if any, would you make to the asylum system?
I've been clear in prioritizing the necessity of a secure southern border and an asylum process that works, but I've got to circle back because Joe is seriously mistaken. The role of the federal government is not in choosing the shape and color of the bridge. That's a local and state decision. My job is to make sure our federal tax dollars come home to build the infrastructure that matters to us. The projects he's talking about, I'm proud of fighting for our community's voices to be heard by the state and local representatives who are going to make those decisions. I've sent letters. I've worked hard to ensure that we're not bearing a disproportionate burden for the bells and whistles another state wants to put on the bridge. That's just common sense.
This brings us now to our closing statements. Marie won our coin toss and took the first question. Because of that, Joe got to choose who would go first for the closing. He has chosen to give the final remark last. Marie, you have 1 minute for your closing statement.
Yeah, I'm proud of doing exactly what I said I would do 2 years ago. As a small business owner, as a mom, as somebody who works in the trades, lives on a gravel road, I worked hard to represent the independent values of Southwest Washington, D.C. I'm tired of their values being inflicted on us. I want our priorities reflected there. The reality is that Joe wants to diminish the work that I've done. He wants to make it seem small. But I don't think rural transportation for rural veterans is small. I don't think infrastructure is small. I don't think a level playing field for our businesses is small. Joe thinks they're small because he's not listening to us. He wants us to think that he knows more than us, that he knows better than us. But Joe doesn't even know us.
Joe, you have 1 minute for your closing statement.
Well, thanks to everybody who's tuning in and engaged in the voting process. I had the honor of serving our country for 20 years, 11 combat deployments. And look, when I get out and I talk to people in the district, they're really hurting. Folks can barely afford to put food on the table. They're concerned about the fentanyl. You heard it here tonight. And these are direct reflections of the policy choices that my opponent has made in Washington, D.C. Go to mariewatch.com. You'll see she voted to leave the border wide open, flooding our district with fentanyl and with illegals. You'll see that she voted for this out-of-control inflationary spending, $4 trillion in just 2 years. And most radically, she voted to allow biological men into your daughter's dressing room and to compete against them on the athletics field. Now, she'll say that she's a moderate, but this is one of the most radical things that I've ever heard of, allowing men into our daughter's dressing rooms and protected spaces. I support a return to common sense. Let's secure our border. Let's stop the flow of fentanyl. Let's actually balance our budget. Let's prioritize American citizens as opposed to more foreign wars and more foreign aid. Let's build an actual third bridge that really actually reduces the amount of congestion that we have right now. A 3-lane bridge with a 3-lane bridge and light rail and tolls, that doesn't work for anybody. I'd be honored to go serve you in Washington.
Right. I believe I have one more. I didn't use all 3 of mine. You know, Joe keeps bringing up his weird mariewatch.com. You can just Google what Joe, his record.
Oh, wait,
Google
no, we both get a chance to go.
White nationalism, Joe Proud Boys. You can Google it for yourself.
We'll do it for the special edition of K2 News. We have interviews with both candidates on our website right now under the Your Voice, Your Vote. We'll also post this entire debate online. You can watch it on YouTube as well as K2.com. Thanks again to the candidates and to our sponsor for the debate, Willamette University. Once again, if you would like to watch this full debate, it will be on our website, K2.com. As I mentioned, we have interviews with both candidates individually as well. Next Thursday, K2 will host another debate focusing on the race for Portland mayor.
The previous special program was sponsored by Willamette University.